Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy. Yo, dear listeners, welcome back to the podcast. Today, I'm very excited to present to you a podcast episode that I was actually a guest on. I recorded this with George Mycock from MyoMinds, and he's going to release this on his MyoMinds podcast too, which is linked in the show notes below. In this interview, I shared my story, particularly my experience with an eating disorder and with discovering my gender identity and getting into bodybuilding. While I have opened up about this before, this is the most thorough account that I've ever given anyone. That's why the full podcast is actually 2 hours, and I decided for that reason to divide it into 2 parts. Before we start, please be aware that in this episode, I'm going to discuss very low body weights and BMIs, specific caloric intakes, disordered eating, food rules and behaviors, and over-exercising behaviors. So if you're not in a place where it's safe for you to listen to this, please skip both this and the next episode. And now, without further ado.
Hi, Nikias. How are you?
I felt better before you mispronounced my name, George. I thought we were friends.
Is that wrong? That's
yes.
That's what I thought it was the whole time. Wait, what?
No.
How do I say
it? It's Nikias.
Nikias. Oh my god, I'm an asshole. You know what? As well, I fucking hate this about me because I am that like fucking white guy that just can't say anyone's name. You know what I mean? Like whenever I meet anyone from like English fucking prick that just is like constantly butchering everyone's name. I was in a meeting yesterday with someone and I said their name like wrong like 4 times and I knew what it was and I kept like rehearsing it in my head before I did it and then I go to say it and then I just fuck it up. So I'm sorry.
Well, I just have to say I will never be your friend again.
No.
And that's the end of the podcast. So goodbye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for listening. As always. No. I'm sorry about that. I will venture to do better as we
You're
move
good.
forwards.
It's totally fine.
How are you other than me butchering your name?
I'm actually really excited to speak to you today. As you know, I'm a podcaster myself, but I'm usually on the other end of the mic where I'm the host interviewing my guests. So it's really interesting for me to be on this side for once.
And I bet you do a better job of remembering how to say their name than I do. So hopefully I'll be better for the rest of it.
Well, I don't know about that. Sometimes I have to ask them before the recording starts, how do you actually say your name? Because I don't want to say it wrong on air. And that's
I was so confident I had it right. That's why I didn't ask. Because I know how to say this name. Oh well. Good. Well, yeah. I'm glad you're looking forward to it. I'm really excited to kind of talk things through with you. What have you been up to today? Anything interesting?
Oh, today it's been a really busy day. I'm an online coach and a certified nutritionist. Today was pretty much all work from home day because I say that because sometimes I have clients at the gym as well. But today I only had my online clients to check in with, and I have some calls after our chat as well. I really enjoy the checking in with clients part where I get to actually coach them. So it gives me energy because I'm an extrovert based on Jungian personality psychology theory. So I get energy from the outer world, and in particular, up to a point, social interactions in an environment that I enjoy, such as that of fitness and nutrition, really energize me.
See, I always think I'm kind of I'm more of an introvert, I think, but I'm like a learned extrovert. So I always say that I have this like other version of me that as soon as I go into a meeting or I'm like going to present something or I'm going to do a podcast, there's like other form of me that I've like taught myself to to be able to like manifest just comes out. There's always a thing where before I do any presentation, my brain always goes like, I'm always there's always a slight bit of panic, and then I'm just like, no, that other George will come out as soon as I get on that stage. He will come out, and I'll be fine. Um,
My understanding is that the majority of introverts are learned extroverts, in the sense that our westernized society um, promotes certain ideals, even with regards to personality, and one of them is that of somebody who's very extroverted.
mm,
And so I think that in order to exist in this society, a lot of introverts need to learn how to be more extroverted.
Yeah, maybe that is it. And you're right. Yeah, I think even just as a kid, I didn't want to hang around with people and talk to people as much. But like you say, you feel that pressure to yeah, like you say, the very chatty, outgoing personality is the one that people view as the. I feel like it's viewed more positively than the wanting to stay inside, not to talk to people, etc. Um, well, I've learned something already. So
You know, I like personality
no,
psychology.
yeah, we've had several conversations about this kind of things, which is even worse. That yeah, oh well, oh well. I was going to say even worse that I don't know your name because we've spoken for so long about so many different things and I don't know how to pronounce your name. Oh, I'm going to forget about that now. I'm so embarrassed. Anyway, we're here for one of the My Mind Stories podcasts, which I will do a brief introduction for in case this is the first one for people listening. If it is, go back and listen to the others as well because they're all excellent. The MyoMinds stories are a kind of new like subcategory of the podcast in my mind, which is a bit of an ode to what MyoMinds used to be. Where when I first set up MyoMinds, it was an online blog where people could post their stories anonymously or kind of put their faces to it about their stories with exercise, eating, body image concerns, and that kind of stuff. And I was thinking of a way. The podcast has been on hiatus for a while, and I was thinking of a way to kind of introduce something new into it and come up with something new. And I thought it'd be interesting to bring back this idea. So these podcasts are based around 3 questions that I ask every guest, and hopefully from these questions and I think what we've seen so far in the podcast that I've done, we find the kind of shared similarities between people's stories, but also unique things that not only show how each of us are individuals who have our own stories and experiences, but also tend to highlight something that I learned in myself. So there's been lots of times where someone said, "Oh, this is an aspect of my story," and I think, "Oh shit, I didn't realize that was the case." Or when I reflect on it, you might have the same kind of epiphany moments. And it's just, I think stories are so powerful and so intuitive and so meaningful that I really want to highlight them in this. So, without further ado, we're going to get in, and we're going to start with question 1, which is: let's start with your story, the way you want to tell it. So, start from the beginning and share what you'd like, and I'll probably chime in occasionally to share some reflections and ask questions. But over to you.
Well, first of all, George, thank you for having me. And dear listeners, thank you for tuning in. I'm going to start by introducing myself. I'm 28 at the moment. As I've said, I work in the fitness industry as an online fitness coach and certified nutritionist. I'm saying that because it's going to be relevant to my story. And also, I want to share with you that I am a transgender man, meaning that I was assigned female at birth, therefore, my body is female. I have all of the female apparatus that we're all aware of. However, I started my transition in 2020 medically, which is why my voice sounds amazing, which means that I've been on testosterone therapy since 2020. And I want to start my story by bringing up the first memory I have of having any thoughts about my body. And I was probably around 6 years old at this time. And I was playing in my garden with my best friend. We were neighbors, so we always played in each other's garden. And it was summer, it was really hot. So we were both wearing just scant clothing. She was wearing a crop top, especially, and it was the very first time that I noticed that she was slimmer than me. And obviously, then I was 6 years old, so I also presented as a girl, and I thought, oh, I would like to wear that crop top. And so, or a crop top like that anyway. And I asked my parents if they could get one for me. And eventually my dad found it and he bought me a crop top. And when I wore it, I was really disappointed because it didn't look the same way on me as it did on my friend because I was a little bit shabbier. So that was the first time I had any understanding of a body image. And growing up, I was an overweight teenager. And especially starting from middle school, so around 11 years old, I was made fun of because of my weight. I also didn't like PE. I was the typical person who would skip PE. Um, Getting my period for the first time was excellent because it became my excuse whenever I was often on my period, so I couldn't exercise during PE. I didn't like any sports, I didn't like any exercise, but I was regularly active. I've been active since I was 3 because my parents thought that it would be healthy for me to move. So they sent me to various classes. I did swimming. That's what I started with when I was 3. Then for 6 years, I did volleyball. I did a couple of years of judo. I did a single year of training at the gym in quotation marks. I was just given a cookie cutter program using some machines. Um, and then I primarily focused on endurance running. Now, when I was about 15, that's when these comments and this bullying that I received about my weight, and I want to clarify that this was verbal bullying. Luckily, I was fortunate enough never to undergo physical bullying. They really got to me, and I decided that enough was enough, and I was going to lose weight. And I'm a very headstrong person, and I've always been called stubborn by my parents. That's one of the terms that they prefer when referring to me. And when I make a decision, I also tend to go all in. I am not very good at listening to my physical needs or psychological needs or emotional needs if they get in the way of my goals. So once I made a decision that I was going to lose weight, that's what was going to happen. It didn't matter if I enjoyed it or if I didn't. What mattered to me was the outcome. However, I had no real understanding of how to go about it beyond the basic understanding of weight loss that my mom had because she was really into health magazines. So she read a lot about nutrition, but also she never needed to lose weight. So she knew that you needed to exercise more and eat less. But she didn't really understand much about calories. She was much more focused on nutrition for the purpose of maintaining health as opposed to losing weight. So, not knowing very much about it myself, and with her advice to try to exercise a bit more and eating a little bit less, I took that to an extreme because I wanted the results. And so I was able to. Oh, and before I go into this part, I want to make sure that if you're not comfortable with a discussion of a restrictive eating disorder that includes weight and calorie amounts, you don't listen to these parts. Because what I was going to say was that in about a year or so, I'm not exactly sure about the timeline, but I think it was 10 to 12 months, I went from 62 kilograms to 41. So I went from 137 pounds to 90. And for reference, I'm 5 foot tall, so I'm not a very big person, but still, that was a pretty substantial amount of weight loss over that period of time. And at this point, I was using exercise purely as a means to lose weight. That's when I got into endurance running because I already knew, or at least I thought, I didn't enjoy any other form of exercise. And that seemed to be one form of exercise that I could do very easily. I could go out, I could go to the gym. I lived in an area that was walkable, so I could go out for a run if I wanted to, as opposed to having to find a facility. So it seemed to be the most effective way for me at the time. That's why I chose it. So I would go running for an hour around 4 days per week. And at one point, I escalated this to an excessive degree, whereby I was also, on top of that, exercising for about half an hour before every main meal every single day. But this was a very short-lived phase because I also needed to go to school. I can't remember exactly when I was doing this, but I think it was a summer, and it was a summer holiday, so I had the time, I had the opportunity. So before breakfast, lunch, and dinner, I would do a 30 minutes high intensity workout. And when I say high intensity, I don't mean it was true hits, because half an hour is too long for true hits. It was a circuit, essentially, that I did at the highest intensity that I was capable of. So it was all primarily cardiovascular exercise. And I was doing this because I was convinced that it would stoke my metabolism and help me lose more weight. As for nutrition, what my mother suggested I do was, how about you slightly reduce your portions? What I did was I slashed my portions. I was having a whole plate of pasta and about one or two slices of bread at lunch every day, and I removed the bread altogether, and I reduced the plate of pasta to about a quarter of the original size. I wasn't able to control what I actually ate because my mother cooked for me, but I could control my portions, and I took that to a real extreme. Then, looking more into this weight loss malarkey, I discovered the term calories, and also I started to learn which foods would be better to have more of or less of. And when I say better, I want to clarify that I don't necessarily agree with this anymore, because what seemed better to me at the time was the lowest the calorie per 100 grams, the better. And I also had several other rules around what I considered healthy eating that were all related to this misunderstanding of metabolism, where I was convinced that if I kept my metabolism running, if I kept it stoked, then I would be able to lose weight or maintain the weight loss once I was happy with what I'd achieved. So these rules included having frequent meals, again, to stoke the metabolic fire, preferentially no carbohydrates in the evening. I didn't necessarily have the 6 p.m. cutoff that a lot of people talk about nowadays when they make a joke, but if at dinner time I wouldn't have carbs, essentially. I also was concerned with eating immediately upon waking, because my understanding was that the metabolism would dangerously slow down when we were sleeping. And also, eating immediately after exercise was important to keep your metabolism running, which is why I had that summer phase where I was training 30 minutes before every meal. Now, my mother, on the other hand, I lived with her. My dad was present in my life, but he worked and lived elsewhere because my parents weren't together. So my mother didn't have an understanding of calories, and I was able to hide how little I was eating because of that. Because she would see a plate full of food and she wouldn't realize that it was all very low calorie food. Like, I would fill it up with a big salad and then plain chicken breast. And then I would add a tiny bit of rice. And she would see that and she would be happy with it. She would think, okay, that's a reasonably sized meal. You just eat very, in quotation marks, healthy food. And I remember having a conversation about it with her one day. And at this point, it was later on in the development of this eating disorder that I got, where she actually came to terms with the fact that I had one, because it took her some time. It took both my parents some time to fully accept that I had a problem, because they always thought really highly of me. And I don't have children, so I can't imagine how difficult it might be to accept that one of the people you love the most in your life, one of the people you made, has such a life consuming problem. So when she finally came to term with that, oh,
Oh,
sorry, are
sorry.
you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask. So, what was that you mentioned? Because that is a really hard part of, at least from my own experience. You know, there's a sense of feeling like you have to own up to your eating disorder, or like you have to, like, admit it is the word people use, because it feels like this negative part of you, and often does negatively affect you. And for me, when for a while I had, people in my life who struggled to accept it. I struggled to accept that this was something I was going through. Did that, and that made me feel even worse almost, because I was confused by it, and it was almost like I had to go through it all again, because I've just brought up the courage to tell you about this thing, and then you've rejected it, and now I've got to do it again to try and like convince you. Is that something that you experienced yourself, or no?
No, I didn't, because I never had to tell anyone that I had an eating disorder. By the time people accepted or recognized that I had one, it was so obvious, because
Okay.
I developed anorexia nervosa, and I had the physical manifestation of it,
Mm,
whereby I was extremely gaunt.
mm.
So I did go through a phase where I initially lost the weight and went from chubbier to slim, and I received a lot of compliments. They quickly turned into concerned questions about my well-being, because I clearly looked like I was more bone and more skin and bone than anything else.
Yeah, that was actually, I'll ask my other question I had, because that leads into that. I was going to ask about that when you mentioned the weight loss, and how you initially started with food, and then kind of brought in exercise and brought in these different aspects, and it kind of went kind of more and more. Do you think those compliments you were getting for the weight loss, like, attributed to that? Did that kind of, do you think, at least partially encourage you to do more? Because that, again, that's my experience, was the more weight I lost, the more people gave me praise, so I wanted to lose it quicker and faster.
So I decided that I wanted to lose weight because I was tired of people making negative comments about me, and because I didn't like the way I looked either. Therefore, when I got encouraging feedback, or rather, what I deemed to be positive feedback, yes, it definitely encouraged me, not necessarily to do more, but to make sure I did not lose those results.
Mm,
So when eventually the weight loss stopped, the obsession for me turned towards staying the same. I was
mm.
terrified of regaining the weight I'd lost.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Um, yeah, because it's almost like, and again, tell me if this um, resonates with you, but for me, it almost felt sometimes when people gave me those compliments on how my body changed, it was like they set the standard for what got their respect. So, okay, where my body's at now is what gives me a compliment from you, or, like you say, kind of stops you from saying negative things about me. So if I lose this body now, if it goes back at all, that's going to come back, or I'm going to lose that respect. It's almost like it creates this fear of, oh shit, I can't go back now.
It's interesting because I don't think at the time what I was worried about was losing the praise that I was getting. I was afraid of the sense of guilt that I would personally feel if
Mm,
I did anything that I deemed dangerous to my goal. So, and that was what um, I think what made me maintain the eating disorder behaviors for so long. It was
mm,
this impending sense of guilt. It was like a sword of Damocles hanging over the nape of my neck. And I was terrified that if I ate food that I deemed unhealthy, even once, or if I didn't exercise like I'd planned to on that day, then I would feel that sense of guilt. And it was really that motivated me more so
mm,
than the fear that I would lose the praise that I was receiving. Because as I've said, I still maintained the behaviors even when people became concerned about me. So it
mm.
wasn't really about their feedback anymore. It was more so about my terrifying sense of guilt that I did not want to experience. And
Yeah.
it wasn't even the guilt itself, because actually, when I started engaging in recovery behaviors, I realized that when I did eat a piece of cake, the guilt wasn't as bad as I thought. It was my anticipation of the guilt. I always expected the guilt to be crippling. And then when I actually did feel any, it wasn't that bad. But the anticipation of it being crippling paralyzed me.
Yeah, there's in the kind of theory around like dependency on exercise is like when I'm looking at like compulsive exercise work, they often talk about the fear of guilt. Like it's not always the guilt, it's the fear of it. Like what if I stop doing this exercise, or if I eat this thing or whatever it is, what if I feel that bad? What if it
Exactly.
feels yeah. Anyway, yeah, continue with your story, please.
So I was just talking about how my mom never noticed what was happening, or for a long time she didn't notice. And I wanted to bring up an anecdote which I think is helpful to let the listeners in on how confused she was, because we were having this conversation where um, she initially asked me to weigh myself, because once she came to terms with the eating disorder I had, she really wanted to help me recover. One way to monitor my recovery was checking my weight, so she asked me to weigh myself, and to tell her what the weight was. And on that particular day it was 41 kilograms, which was not the lowest weight I ever got to, but the lowest I got to under her supervision. And I'll talk about what that means in a little bit. When she heard that, essentially the weight hadn't changed since the last time that she checked it, even though she thought that we were making efforts towards increasing my food intake. And she couldn't believe it. And I remember that she got really upset and she was shouting at me, "How is this possible? You're always eating all this food." And at this point, I also wanted to recover. I just couldn't bring myself to do it. And I remember crying and shaking my head and telling her, "It's a lot of food, but it's not enough calories." And so this was just to explain how my mother really didn't make the connection between the importance of calories and the reason why my weight wasn't changing.
Mm.
So anyway, this was later on, when I lost the weight and I got to around this 41 kilogram mark. I was actually never formally diagnosed by a doctor, but I have all the symptoms that had all the symptoms that correspond to anorexia nervosa. However, I would also say that I was very health conscious, so I also exhibited traits that I would associate with orthorexia nervosa, which is not in the DSM 5 yet, as far as I know. For example, in addition to the rules that I stated before, I also wanted all the food that I ate to have less or equal to 3 grams of fat per 100 grams of products, or less than or equal to 3 grams of sugar for per 100 grams product. And also the calorie amount needed to look low enough for me. I was 15 at this point. I don't remember what low enough meant.
Mm.
I basically made all of this up, let's be honest, based on stuff that I kind of read online. All of these rules were literally extrapolations and also over exaggerations of advice that on the internet might have even sounded a lot more moderate. I just thought, if I do more, I'm going to get better results. I can do more, so why not do more?
That's a really interesting one I want to pick up on there, because that's like reflected in me as well. There was a sense for me, at least, when I would read the like calorie amount or the exercise or whatever it was online, the ones that these influencers were saying, I think the fitness industry in itself talks a lot about being the hardest worker in the room, and like being more than it's very competitively infused quite often. And that's what it felt like. Oh, everyone else is going to stick to this prescription from this influencer, so if I do more or eat less or whatever it was, then I would be better, and then I would like win this competition, this like fake competition that was going on in my brain. But I'd never really thought about it like that before. But yeah, I was the same. I would do a little bit more. It always became more.
Oh, that's interesting. It wasn't like that for me because I wasn't comparing myself to anyone else. Influencer culture didn't exist at the time. Facebook was around, but I wasn't interested in social media. I actually didn't join social media until I was 14, and only because I had long distance friends who basically forced me to. But even after joining, I just wasn't on it. All this
Mm,
information was just information I got from blogs and articles, and I wasn't really thinking. I even subconsciously, the comparison wasn't really what was going on for me. It was more a case of I really wanted to edge my bets towards certain success. So I
mm,
would think, okay, if this is the prescription, if I make it a little bit harder, surely I will definitely get the results that I want, and maybe even better results. And I didn't really have an understanding that of the existence of a bell curve,
yeah.
whereby there's a moderate amount of anything that will get you the results you want, but too much of it will actually make you regress. To me, there was only more is better
Mm,
in my very young brain. So that's really what I was doing. I was trying to make sure that all the effort I put in would definitely get me to my goal, because again, ultimately I am very goal oriented at the
mm,
expense of everything else, and that's definitely what happened. It is my personality that it's this part of my personality that I channeled into the eating disorder. I actually really like that my personality is the way it is, but at the time I channeled it into the wrong behaviors.
mm. Thank you.
Anyway, so now fast forward from 15 to 17. The summer I turned 17, I was I done with weight loss. I wasn't necessarily trying to lose any more weight, but I wanted to maintain this very low body weight that kept other people concerned, or at least roused other people's concerns. At this point, they were starting to arise. And I left my home. I grew up in Italy, in not far from Venice, in a very small town, and I went on an exchange student program where I spent a semester in the US, which is why earlier I said that 41 kilos is the lowest weight I got under my mother's supervision,
Mm,
because once I went away, things took a turn for the worst because I was much less supervised than I'd been at home. At least in the host family that I lived with, the children were much more independent at our age, because I had two host sisters who were my age. We were around 17, so they were already considered adults. They were already driving essentially, and they had a lot more freedom than I'd ever experienced. And I received that same degree of freedom as well, especially with me not being a child of this couple. So they gave me even more freedom and independence. So this is when I hit the lowest weight I ever saw on the scale, which was a turning point for me, because I stepped on the scale, and I remember this clearly. I've never used pounds before, so I had no idea what the number meant. When I saw 82 pounds, you could have told me that that was 82 ducks. I had no idea, but then I went on the internet and I converted it into kilograms. And I grew up using kilograms, so that's what I had an emotional attachment to and a rational understanding of. And when I realized that 82 pounds was 37 kilograms, I I broke down crying, and I thought I'm going to die, because I knew that that was too little. Like, children are 37 kilograms, and I was a 17-year-old. This was the lowest point I hit back then, mentally and physically. And unfortunately, my host family didn't much help my mental state either. For one, they all struggled with obesity. And I want to tell this part of the story not to pass negative judgment about them, because I never spoke to them about this. I haven't spoken to them since. And I don't know why they were doing what they were doing, but I am assuming that they wanted to help me. Unfortunately, the decisions they made about their behaviors did not help me at that particular point in time. Anyway, to give some context, they all struggled with obesity. And in addition to that, they had a previous student who also struggled with a similar eating disorder to me. So they were quite forceful in the way they perhaps attempted to help me, in that they would make really strong negative comments about the fact that I wasn't eating enough and about the food choices that I was making. And I wasn't in the right place to hear that strong degree of negativity. And in my eyes, they became my enemies. They became people who were trying to prevent me from hold on to these results that I'd done so much to achieve. And this was the parents' reaction. As for the two daughters, I had a particular issue with one of them where because she was struggling with her own weight so much, and over the years she'd always struggled. She had recently gotten to what she believed to be the best shape that she was in, and I was slimmer. And just imagine, diet culture at the time among girls in America, being slimmer was better. It was the time when being skinny was considered a compliment. So she looked at me after all the effort she put into her own fitness journey. She would see that I was smaller. She would see that I maintained behaviors that she could not maintain. And I'm not saying that to praise myself because they nearly killed me. And she was jealous. She was envious of me. And so she bullied me for what I did. For example, she would say that there was no point in me hanging out with her sister, and their friends if they were going to some food place, because she would say, "You wouldn't eat anything anyway, so why would you come?"
Mm.
And this kind of behavior was essentially verbal abuse, and it isolated me even more than I already was. I didn't know anyone in the town where I spent this semester, and this kind of behavior where she kept me from meeting other people um, only contributed to that isolation. And well, left to my own devices, there wasn't much else for me to do other than maintain the eating disorder behaviors. So, again, this is not to pass any judgment on that family, it's to explain why I was able to maintain the behaviors, even when I saw that weight on the scale, and even when I thought I was going to die, and I started thinking, I need to do something about this because this
Mm.
is a problem.
So yeah, so like you're saying, even when you'd recognize this was a problem and you wanted to change, these like methods of trying to, like you say, I imagine they were trying to help you. They were making it harder for you to move away from them. It's something I always sometimes I'll do like courses around like helping people with eating disorders, and one thing I always say is one of the methods that people tend to attempt to do when they want to speak to someone who they think is experiencing an eating disorder is they do the confrontational method, where they think, right, you've got an eating disorder, you've got a problem, I'm here to help you, eat more, do this, whatever, blah blah blah. And as much as I can understand it, especially in some people in a sense of panic, like they're like, oh my god, you're really ill, you need like stop. It does, like you say, it puts your back up, it puts your like guard up, because oh, you're my enemy, you're criticizing me, you're labeling me with this thing. And even if we recognize it in ourselves, for someone else to come along and pretend they know this about you, and they speaking in that kind of manner just isn't helpful. It's much better to be supportive and to say, I'm concerned and we want to work with you to try and help. Is there a way that we can help? These kind of things that are less confrontational in that way.
I haven't looked into the research enough to know what might be more helpful.
Mm,
However, I would say that for the way I was at the time, I don't know that supportive behavior would have helped any,
mm,
mainly because I was very headstrong. I had a very black or white mindset, and an all or nothing mindset as well, whereby what I thought was the law and everybody else who disagreed with me was wrong.
mm.
So
What do you think would have helped? Was there anything?
Honestly, I'm not sure I can say. It was, well, for one, it was 12 years ago now that this all started.
Yeah.
Even more, it was 13 years ago because I'm 28 now. So it was a long time ago. And since nothing that was that none of the approaches that were ever taken with me worked, I can't tell you what would have.
Fair. That's fair enough.
In any case, something else that came up for me at this time was a strengthening of this relationship with guilt that we've already mentioned,
Hmm.
because the host family wanted to send me back home early on the grounds that I had an eating disorder and needed help, and that absolutely terrified me. Going to America had been my dream for years. It was, at least at the time, a common dream. Italians used to look at America with rose tinted glasses, and I was one of them. And I hated myself because I felt like I was squandering it. If I was sent home early, I was ruining it. Because of what I was doing to myself. I was desperate. I remember I had a call with my parents on Skype, after I found out that the host family was trying to find a way to send me home early, and I was sobbing. I told them these exact words: "I'm so stupid, and this is all my fault." And I just kept repeating that over and over again, and I was crying. I had never seen my parents look so desolate. They're quite solution and problem solving oriented type people. So whenever I had an issue, their immediate reaction, whether right or wrong, was to offer a solution. It was the first time they were both looking at me, and neither of them said a word. I could see it in their face. They didn't know what to do. The best they could come up with was to ask me not to call myself stupid, because they were just so distraught, and they didn't know how to help me. They were too far away to hold me even, and there was no consoling me. This was the one of the worst emotional breakdowns I've ever had in front of my family.
And that's a sorry to come in, but that sounds really like a horrible moment for you and for your family. And I think that kind of adds on to what we were talking about before, with when you said, you weren't sure what would have helped you at the time. And sometimes I think, especially in eating disorders, that there are moments where nothing will help, and there is no magical thing someone can say or a solution someone can give. Sometimes you just need that time of just someone being there for you, or just having that space to talk about stuff, or to maybe sometimes there just isn't a way to get through to people, or to help people, or to whatever it is. It's just being there for them if they want to speak to you, if they just to be supporting for them.
I agree, and in fact, I think maybe what would have helped me at the time would have been to have more of an opportunity to talk about this out loud, because I'm being an extrovert means that I get to a point. I obviously have an inner world. I have thoughts and feelings, but my let's say my energy, my battery to deal with those is very limited. I run out of patience, time, and just capacity to deal with my thoughts in my own head and my feelings much faster than the introverts that I know. So for me, I get to this point where I realize that I no longer have this capacity to think. And now I've learned that that's when I need to talk about the thought with somebody else, because having the conversation will get me to continue building up on the thought. So the thought in my head is incomplete, and it becomes complete when I can talk about it, because that's how I conclude the train of thought, essentially. And I think that if I'd had that opportunity at the time, maybe that would have been more helpful.
That's really interesting, because that basically the exact phenomena you just described there is what I get when I write stuff down. Like journaling gives me the same thing, where like my thought gets complete when I write it out. It's interesting that we have kind of similar thing there, but from a different like. I
Yeah.
imagine it's the same kind of mechanism. It's just done in a different way.
I think it is very similar, and in fact, it showcases the difference between an extrovert like me and an introvert like you, whereby you write, so you're alone by yourself. You're still engaging with your inner world. You're just putting it down on paper. Whereas I actually need an engagement with the outer world, because I don't have the capacity. Like writing things down doesn't do that for me, because to me, it's still in my head.
Yeah, that makes sense.
In any case, I think being able to have these breakdowns, as I call them, was actually helpful, because that's when my very immature 17-year-old self started to put together just how big of a negative impact the behaviors I was engaging in were having on my health and my life as a whole. I realized that it was consuming me, and for what? Because now I could see my bones in the mirror, and then when I lay down on my side, I felt this eerie sense of self satisfaction because my hip bone was digging into the mattress and it was physically uncomfortable. And that sense of discomfort made me feel good about myself for some reason. And that's when I began to think that it wasn't worth it and that I wanted to do something about these compulsions. But again, I couldn't bring myself to act on it. I knew what I needed to do. I knew that I needed to gain weight. I knew that I needed to exercise less and eat more. I just couldn't do it. And it was when I went back home and my parents, my mother in particular, my dad never really felt comfortable talking to me about the eating disorder at this stage. But my mother stepped up and offered me help. And we started talking about it a little bit more. That's when we started trying to make a collective effort for me to eat more and really let go of these behaviors. And one of these efforts translated into my mother is a teacher, and she had an ex student who was now an adult and who was a therapist, and he specialized in working with people who had anorexia nervosa. So I never actually saw him officially, but he would visit us under the excuse of having coffee with my mother, and then essentially he would give me a therapy session. I might have had like 5 sessions with him in this way, and honestly, I don't think he was particularly helpful, other than to help me realize that I was holding my parents to really high standards, and I was holding myself to really high standards because I thought that I had to achieve as much as I possibly could, essentially, in order to be the kind of child that was worthy of them as parents. And the one thing that I remember from those meetings, the only thing I remember, was him telling me, "Your parents are just human. You're putting them on a pedestal. They're not superheroes, and you need to let go of that." And that was important because I was always striving for more in academia, in my private life, in my academic life. Anything I did, I wanted to do it to the max, and that included the eating disorder behavior. So I think that that was actually helpful, even though I didn't see the results at that particular point in time, um, towards changing my mindset, where to help me understand that nobody cared how much I achieved or didn't achieve. My dad always told me, I don't care what the grade is on paper. What matters to me is that you did your best. If you do your best, the grade is what the grade is. And it took me a lot, really, took me decades of life, George and listeners, to really wrap my head around that concept. For me, if it wasn't the maximum grade, it wasn't worth it. Similarly, if it wasn't the maximum amount of weight loss and weight maintenance after that, it wasn't worth it. But even though this particular person didn't really wasn't pivotal in my recovery necessarily, it still contributed, and I continued to work on my recovery on my own. I was never hospitalized because I never needed to, thankfully. I also never saw anyone in a professional capacity other than this person in an official capacity. So everything that I accomplished in my own recovery was on based on my own research, and also everything I couldn't accomplish was because the eating disorder was holding me back. At this point, I felt like I had two sides to myself. I had the real me. I called it the real me, and the eating disorder brain. I still call it the eating disorder brain. And the real me started doing more and more research. I've always had this habit of getting it, not habits, but my thought process has always been, I realize what I want to achieve. I do some research, sometimes excessively cursory research into what's best to do, and then I try to apply it on my own. I didn't want anyone's help. I liked to be independent to accomplish what I accomplished by myself. So I started doing research by reading a lot of books and blogs written by women and girls who had suffered or were suffering from anorexia, because I thought that if I could figure out why I felt the need to maintain the eating disorder behaviors, then I thought that this would help me overcome the behaviors. So I trawled the internet for blogs. I got a lot of books from the library. I even watched a couple of movies, but there weren't a lot at the time. And what surprised me was that I couldn't relate to any of those stories. With regards to, I could relate to the behaviors. They were doing what I was doing, but I didn't relate to the way these people talked about their needs. They said that they really wanted to be thin and graceful. That's what they associated with the uh, this very slim, malnourished look. And they would post pictures of their inspiration, and they would be pictures that would make me cringe. I felt repulsed by that particular appearance. And funnily enough, at this point, I looked just as gaunt. I just couldn't see it in myself. But when I saw those pictures, I just didn't find them inspirational. If anything, I didn't want to look like that. I could tell that it was unhealthy. And so their reasons for wanting to maintain their eating disorder behaviors didn't resonate at all. And I'm mentioning this now because it will become important later. Even so, dragging myself and being dragged along by my mother, I managed to get my weight back to the cusp between underweight and normal weight according to the BMI category. And so, because I was at the very least barely weight restored, then everybody was happy. And at this point, I still had a lot of disordered eating behaviors, but I would say it was disordered eating rather than a full blown eating disorder. But I do want to talk about something that I don't think a lot of people talk about, which is, well, on the outside and even in my head, things were starting to change for the better. There were changes that the eating disorder caused that would probably never be reversed on the inside, that are harder to check for, and it's harder to understand the impact of at any one time. Essentially, the eating disorder devastated my insides. At this point, I've done multiple DEXA scans to check my bone mineral density. And when they run this particular type of DEXA scan, they test two sites. And in both sites, not in both sites, in one site, I have osteopenia, which is a loss of bone mineral density that typically occurs with age. So I should not be undergoing this at 28. But it's not as bad as osteoporosis, which sadly I do have in the other site. So at 28, I have the bones of an old man. And I have to take calcium and vitamin D. And I'm also currently on a drug that's currently prescribed to elderly people. And in an attempt to reverse this state of low bone mineral density. And I say that because um, not many people will talk about bone mineral density in relation to eating disorders. And just to give you an understanding into how uncommon this is, my GP went to talk to a specialist in bone mineral density before prescribing this drug to me, because she'd never done it with somebody my age, and she didn't know that it was the best choice for my health, because it's just because people my age don't need it. And then, in addition to that, there was also the impact on my hormones. My periods stopped when I was around 16. They have never come back. This means that until I finally had access to testosterone in March 2020, I essentially spent 7 to 8 years without any sex hormones. All of my levels were extremely low. They were essentially undetectable by blood test. And this had a negative effect on my bone mineral density, because estrogen has a protective effect in people assigned female at birth. it had a negative effect on my libido, which was non-existent throughout this period. And I'm sure there are a lot of other physiological processes that sex hormones are needed for that I'm not smart enough to remember or even know right now. And last but not least, my thyroid hormone production declined to the point where the first time I had my thyroid checked, the endocrinologist who saw me thought that my pituitary gland was what she called dead. Basically, wasn't functioning anymore because I was not producing much um, thyroid hormones at all, any particular kind. They were all low. There are several kinds, and they were all pretty low. And this, in case you don't know, dear listeners, affects your metabolism and your overall well-being. In that, I was always cold. For example, my body temperature was always quite low, and I always struggled with, even when I was weight restored, I always struggled with being comfortable, even in warm weather. And I'm now, as a result of that, on thyroid medication for life because I have an underactive thyroid. So this is to say, I was at that point in a far better place than I'd ever been before. I am now in the best place I've ever been with my health, but there are still some aspects of health that may never be the same again because of what my body went through.
Mm. Are the like medications helping you? So you mentioned like being on testosterone now and being on this thyroid and being on I don't think you mentioned the drug, but the one for like osteoporosis. Are they is it helping? Is it like, yeah, how are you feeling with that at the moment?
So the bone mineral density drug is called, I don't know how to pronounce this exactly, but I think it's risedronate sodium.
Okay.
And that's, I was told that I need to take that for at least a year and then had another DEXA scan. I think it's actually a couple of years, not even a single year. And then you do another DEXA scan and you check whether the bone mineral density loss has stopped or ideally reversed. Saying that, testosterone has helped in two ways. The first way is that sex hormones do help with bone mineral density loss, against bone mineral density loss. And it's actually one of the reasons why I was able to get on testosterone before I was seen by a gender identity clinic. Technically, you need a gender identity clinic to see you and prescribe testosterone in the UK. Some GPs, and that's where I live now, I live in the UK. Some GPs will do what's called shared care, where, or a rather, first there's a bridging prescription. They bridge the gap between you and the gender identity clinic on the grounds that you have a particular reason why testosterone or any hormone you might want to take as a gender diverse person is particularly indicated for you. Some GPs will do it just to help with gender, not just, it's a massive deal, but they will do it even if you don't have any particular condition other than diagnosed gender incongruence, which was previously called gender dysphoria. Many GPs don't feel comfortable with that, so they might not do it at all, sadly. One of the reasons why my GP chose to prescribe testosterone to me as a bridging prescription before I ever saw a gender identity clinic, which would have taken many more years, unfortunately, was that my bone mineral density was low. He said, if you were a cisgender woman, I would want to give you estrogen, but you're not going to take that because you're trans. So it would be remiss of me not to propose testosterone to you because it might have a chance of improving your bone mineral density. And it didn't improve the loss, but ever since the first scan I ever did before testosterone, what I've noticed is that with what all my medical team has noticed as well, is that the bone mineral density loss has stopped. And
Mm.
that's interesting because testosterone is at least one contributing factor, because at the time of my first DEXA scan, I was already lifting weights, which obviously is not obviously, if you don't know, dear listeners, it's massively helpful to maintain or improve bone mineral density. So the only new variable at the time of the second DEXA scan was the testosterone. And in addition to that, once I achieved the right dose of testosterone to match the testosterone levels that are typical for a cisgender man, somebody who was born in a physiologically male body, who was assigned male at birth, then that also essentially gave me back a libido. I didn't really want to have sex before, now I do. So that definitely helped a lot, yes.
You mentioned before about, I was going to ask about this, was you said how you saw these like the blogs and pictures of women with these bodies that they described as like elegant, or I forget the word you used, I think it was elegant. Graceful, that was the one. And you didn't align with that. Were there bodies that you did align with? Because I'm just thinking, I know like you talk about lifting weights, and so was there a side of like muscularity that came into this, and did your eating disorder like link to muscularity at all? Because that's like my experience. My disordered eating was towards muscularity, so I'm interested if that was the case with you.
Yes, there was definitely a component which also had to do with my own discovery of my gender. And at this point in time, I identified as a cisgender woman because I didn't know any difference. And I was going to talk about that later, a little bit later, but I can jump to that already if you want.
Or if you have a flow in mind, then stick with that, and we'll revert back to this.
I'll complete the answer to the question though, because I didn't cover the medication I take for my thyroid. And yes, in my particular case, the medication I take just makes me the same as somebody with a standard thyroid, so that's sorted for me.
Thank you.
But I will have to take that for life because my thyroid on its own does not produce those hormones.
Okay, well that at least you've got something in place now for it, which is good.
Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.